Good evening. Welcome to Garden Hour, brought to you each week at this time by SDSU Extension. I'm Rhoda Burrows, SDSU Extension Horticulturist, and I'm going to be your host tonight. And with us tonight, we have Kristine Lang, Consumer Horticulture Extension Specialist. And Kristine, what are you going to be talking with us about tonight?
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be talking about some timely gardening topics, things that we should be doing during the month of September, including planting cover crops, if that's something you're interested in, as well as dividing some of our spring and summer blooming perennials. So look forward to that.
Looks good. And Amanda Bachman, who is our pesticide education and urban entomology field specialist. That's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, I think I have the longest job title in extension. So depending on what I'm doing, you can just have half of it. But yeah, I am here in Pierre and I'm going to be talking about some sort of late breaking insect pest questions that just dropped in my inbox this morning, as well as usual, some of the cool stuff that is out there and also some of the things to keep an eye out for as our season progresses. So if you've got any insect questions, feel free to throw those in the Q&A box. And if you have pictures, you can drop those in an email to me or drop the file in the chat for us. So I look forward to visiting with you all.
All right, and I see we already have a question. We'll delay that a little bit. Tonight we will also have with us Christina Lind, who will be joining us in a little while. Again, the horticulture outreach consultant for McCrory Gardens, to share with us what's going on at McCrory. So we look forward to that. And I'm going to be talking tonight, following up on some of Kristine's end of season cleanups, and so several end of season topics, diseases, and a little bit more on storage as well. So, so with that, we'll go ahead and start with Kristine, and I will pull up my screen.
All right, and as Rhoda's getting that rolling, for any of you who joined me last week, and just to fill in those of you who are joining us this week and missed last week, I had given everyone some homework, which was to go out and look at your gardens, both your annual and your perennial gardens, and take some notes on what's doing well, what performed well, what you liked this summer, perhaps what you didn't like, and things you'd like to do differently next year. And we talked a lot about that in terms of annuals, but it really applies to your perennial garden as well. This is a great time of year to be looking at your perennial garden and thinking, what should I rejuvenate? What plants do I want to move, separate, space out? Maybe you want to overhaul a bed entirely. So the photo on the left, that is a peony bed that was sent to me earlier this summer from someone in South Dakota. Now I can't remember where, but this was an old peony planting. It had been in the ground for 20 plus years, and the leaves were starting to look a little bit chlorotic. So you can see a little bit of yellowing, especially on the front plant. And there were some close-up photos that showed that nicely as well. So I first suspected some possible issues with, soil fertility, nutrient availability, things of that nature. So they were going to take a soil test. But when I found out that those same peonies had been growing in that spot for 20 plus years, the other thing that occurred to me, because these plants had, declined in bloom time and number of blooms, was just the age of the plants. And peonies are a plant that they like their roots to be very close to the surface. They don't want the crown of the plant buried too deeply. And year over year, after 20 years, as leaves fall and, garden debris accumulates, if there was any top dressing of soil or mulch, those roots in the crown of the plant could have been buried deeper and deeper. So my suggestion for this person was to get the soil test so we could, look at any fertility recommendations, but also consider dividing these plants. And for peonies, August and into September is still a great time to divide those plants. And then on the right, Again, anyone who joined last week, you're noticing I'm just finding excuses to include pictures of my pets. So my dog Lola is posing in front of some alliums in a perennial garden at my parents' home in Minnesota. And those alliums, I show this as an example, they're still filling, they're still kind of taking up that space in the garden. So that, for example, I wouldn't dig up and separate those bulbs quite yet, but in a few more years when those get larger, just like tulips, for example, you let that foliage die back, you can dig apart those bulbs after that foliage has died back completely, and you can replant those at the end of September into October, giving yourself some time before the ground freezes, but waiting for those soil temperatures to be between 50 and 60 degrees. And we'll talk more about planting spring flowering bulbs in the fall, hopefully for our last garden hour. So next slide, Rhoda. So some things to think about again. This is the time to think about dividing spring and summer blooming perennials. That way there's time for them to set buds in the spring and the summer. And here in our northern climate, this can be a bit of a dance ahead of our colder temperatures. You want to give yourself time about 4 to 6 weeks before the ground freezes. So a lot of times we talk about things in terms of that first frost that's, gonna shut down our vegetable gardens, kill or damage a lot of our warm season annual flowers, such as our, geraniums or things like that. But this is in terms of the ground freezing. So the bottom image on the left is a shot of the Mesonet map. And Mesonet, this is a series of weather stations across the state of South Dakota that's managed by SDSU specialists. And right now our soil temperatures across the state, they're sitting around 70 degrees. So I didn't find a great historical soil freeze map, but my recommendation would be, if you're going to be dividing your perennials, get that done, in the month of September or by the middle of October at the latest, to give those plants some time to root into the ground without having any damage from frost. Another reason that fall is a great time to divide plants, we're for the most part past the really extreme temperatures. Our days are getting shorter. We should hopefully continue to have some more fall rains. I know we're still in a drought, so we need to bear that in mind, but weather conditions become more favorable in terms of reducing the stress for our plants. And if you have specific plants that you are curious about division techniques, or should I wait for the fall or wait for the spring, the University of Minnesota has put together an extensive guide, plant by plant list. It's alphabetized with suggestions on how often you should divide and should you wait for the spring or wait for the fall. Because again, the divide spring and summer blooming perennials in the fall is a general recommendation. And I should note that for a lot of plants, the recommendation is every 3 to 5 years, thinking about dividing those out and, putting a smaller component of that plant's crown or the clump of the plant back into the soil. And we have just one more slide on rejuvenating perennials. So some general advice: be firm but gentle. So be firm in the sense that, have a sharp spade or trowel ready to go if you're going to be digging apart these plants, and try to dig out further than necessary. So for example, if you look at the clump of hostas on the right, I would want to dig around the edge of that garden bed that it's in and try to avoid damaging the roots as much as possible, which is where gentle comes in. You want to be able to remove that whole plant if you can. Keep as many of those roots intact as possible, because again, that's what we need to ensure that that plant has a chance to root into the soil, continue to take up water, especially as we've torn apart portions of that root system. So you might want to have a tarp, or even if you've got a table or some plywood that you can put across some sawhorses and outside in your garden, so you can make yourself a workspace that you don't mind getting dirty, whether it's peonies or hostas or any other plants perennial plants that you're moving about your garden, your Shasta daisies, for example. so that you can set that clump on the table and start to pull that apart. You don't want to over divide these plants. Typically, you'll want to look for 3 to 5 healthy shoots to remain in the clump versus putting, just one spindly piece of a hosta in the ground. You want a few more leaves, again, for photosynthesis to support those roots. And we already talked about this a little bit, but fall is a great time to reduce stress on the plants. You want to make sure that everything is getting enough water. If you're digging up these perennials and you're planning to share them with a friend or move them elsewhere in the garden and they're not going to be replanted immediately, make sure they are put in a pot with some garden soil that's moistened or some peat moss that's moistened and kept in a shady location. Another way to reduce stress is to divide and replant perennials early in the morning or at the end of the day. Again, not at high noon. For example, today was a beautiful day, great day to be outside, but maybe high noon wouldn't have been the best time to divide perennials, and making sure those plants get enough water. Another tip, especially with our droughty conditions and our sporadic rains, if that soil is really hard and compact, if you're able to moisten that soil, water a day or two ahead of time before you plan on dividing your perennials in the garden, to soften that soil and make digging a lot easier would be make things a little bit more enjoyable for dividing perennials in the garden. All right. So another timely topic, I've been getting some questions about cover crops. And if you're considering cover crops, I will say that now is the time to plant them. And for cover crops, whether this is your annual flower garden or you're starting to pull plants out of your vegetable garden, things have been harvested. Perhaps you're up to your eyeballs in tomatoes and you've had enough and you're like, you know what, I'm going to take these plants out because I cannot can anymore. Your zucchinis are probably starting to wrap up, hopefully, much to your neighbor's relief, I'm guessing. Because if you have one zucchini, the whole block has zucchini. So when it comes to cover crops, some things to think about is, are you trying to outcompete weeds? Are you looking to add nitrogen to your soil? And are you trying to prevent erosion? For example, maybe your garden's on a hillside or you have an annual planting and then the fall rains come and soil starts to wash away. So cover crops can help solve some of those problems in the fall, and they can also be the first green thing in the spring and start taking up water and nutrients and preventing erosion. Again, most of our gardens are probably in a nice flat location, but it's also a great way to add organic matter back into the soil. So the example I have here, this was when I was doing research at Iowa State. So these were 2 photos of cereal rye, which is will overwinter in, you can plant it in the fall and it'll overwinter through this into the spring and continue growing. So this is one that you'll often see if we have any farmers or friends and family of farmers. You might have seen or know folks who have put cereal rye on acres and acres of cropland, but this is something you could do in your gardens as well. And the photo on the left was planted on September 14th versus the photo on the right was a plot that was planted on October 14th. And you can see the difference in the amount of plant growth. And again, both of these will regrow again in the spring and continue to grow and accumulate biomass and suppress weeds. And again, by having a plant that's already growing, you can outcompete some of those other spring annual weeds. So the reason that it's kind of time is of the essence for planting cover crops, most of the things that we plant as cover crops, unlike cereal rye, are not going to overwinter. So for example, if you were to plant oats or peas, and that's a nice combination because oats being a grass, they germinate and grow quickly. Peas being a legume, they have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria, and that leads to some nitrogen fixation for your soil. But oats and peas will only be able to grow until a killing frost, or maybe through that a little bit, but you're not going to have as much plant material growing. They're not going to survive the winter. So next spring, you'll have just kind of like a mat of dead plant material in the soil, which is still can be more beneficial than bare soil. But the reason you'd want to plant now is so you can get as much growth as possible before killing frosts and before winter. The other reason it's nice to plant now is to make sure that you do get enough moisture or rains. Of course, on a garden scale, you can also consider hand watering or irrigating with a sprinkler. So some cover crop recommendations I've had lately. If you did want perennials, again, cereal or something that will overwinter, cereal rye is a great option. You could also consider planting a clover, which will also act as a perennial for your garden, and that will start growing again in the spring. But for most of the cover crops in the area, Rhoda, if you want to go to the next slide, for most of our cover crops, that planting window is going to close right around the 3rd week of September for reliable establishment. And if you're interested in cover crops for your garden and you want to know what's my planting window, how quickly do I need to source cover crop seed, as well as planting rates, I recommend the Midwest Cover Crops Council Cover Crop Decision Tool. And what's great is you can input your state as well as your county. So I decided to pick from the middle of the state for this example. And that will generate a chart based on historic first frost data, as well as, drawing from research from SDSU as well as other universities in the Midwest to make recommendations on those planting windows. And then each of those cover crops on the left-hand side in the column, you can click on those links and that will come up with a page for all of the planting information. And again, you'll notice this tool is designed really from a row crop perspective, but this information can be translated for home gardens. So for example, I pulled oats as an example. There was a planting rate suggestion of 105 pounds per acre. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, I have to buy a lot of seed. But if we remember that there are 43,560 square feet in an acre, and let's say our garden is 1,000 square feet, that's about 2/100ths of an acre, which means for your garden, if it was 100 by 100, you'd need about 2.4 pounds of oat seed. And that you could easily hand spread across the soil. You could use, like a hand crank seeder, similar to if you were overseeding your lawn or establishing a new lawn. And you don't need a lot of equipment to do this. You need, your hands, some seed, and I would recommend a good garden rake, because if you're broadcasting cover crop seed, it is really helpful to rake over that seed and make sure you have good seed to soil contact for establishment. I've been in situations where I hand broadcast clover seed and it was over a 2-acre area and we didn't have a great way to incorporate it that day. I was hoping it would rain right away and it didn't. There really was no seed germination. And what we did, we reseeded and took a step back, and we ended up pulling and dragging just an old piece of fence over the soil to help mix that seed into the soil. And a good rule of thumb with cover crops to remember is smaller seed typically needs to be planted more shallow. So clover, for example, you want about no more than a 1/4 inch depth versus oats, which can be 1/2 inch to 1 inch depth in the soil. And again, if you don't see rain on the horizon for your gardens, if you're able to hand water or set up a sprinkler, that would be really helpful for cover crop establishment. And I know this was just a teaser for cover crops. We could do several garden hours just on cover crops. So I invite you to explore the cover crop decision tool. And there's also a great resource from North Central SARE, S-A-R-E. They have an excellent book that you can download for free called Managing Cover Crops Profitably. Again, from a farm perspective, but wonderful information on what benefits each cover crop provides, how to plant it, when to plant it, and how to manage it. Because if it doesn't die over winter, you'll need a plan for terminating either with herbicide or using, tarps to block all of the sunlight and kill that cover crop by other means. And last but not least, I hope some of you are able to join us in person next Monday. We would love to have you at the Home and Market Garden Field Day. And several of your panelists tonight, myself and Rhoda Burrows and Amanda Bachman, will definitely be there. Christina, I hope you're able to join us. I know McCrory Gardens is going to have some staff on hand, but the Home and Market Garden Field Day will be giving tours of the local foods education center where the event is hosted. You'll be able to visit with students. You'll be able to visit with us as faculty and extension specialists, and we'll be talking about food safety, garden insects, tomatoes, pumpkins, all sorts of exciting things. It'll be like garden hour, but in person for 2 hours. So a really great time, and we'd love to have you. And with that, let's see.
Kristine,
Yep.
question for you. Do they need to sign up ahead of time or can they just come?
That's a great question. This is going to be a come and go style field day. So we're not, it's a small enough farm. We're not hopping on a wagon and driving from point A to point B. So it's come and go, free, no need to sign up. We will be holding the event rain or shine, and we're hoping for a beautiful evening just like we have today here in Brookings. So, and bring your family, kid-friendly event, and everyone from curious gardeners to experienced vegetable farmers and everyone in between. You're all invited. All right, I'm going to take one of the questions I'm seeing. So what can be done about a reoccurring powdery mildew issue on peony? It was pretty dry this year. There's good air movement around them, and the irrigation sprinklers didn't hit them. And Rhoda, I might have you jump in on this one as well. So peonies are pretty susceptible to powdery mildew. It looks like you're doing most things right. It's important to remember that while powdery mildews, it's not great to look at, it's not really in most cases going to kill the plant. But I would recommend, if you have specific shoots that are really covered, you could consider cutting back and removing those. But just remembering it's more about weather conditions, and humidity can allow it to spread. But interestingly, with powdery mildew, if there's free water, so just water droplets setting on the surface, that actually kind of suppresses the spread versus contributing to it. Fungicides, in this case, I really wouldn't make the investment. How about you, Rhoda?
Well, she says it is recurring, which makes me think it's a variety that's susceptible to it. And I don't see actually a lot of powdery mildew on peonies, so I'm a little curious about that. But Kristine, you're right about its humidity that allows powdery mildew to get started. And actually, if the sprinklers hit it, it might even suppress it some. The other thing I would do is, talking about garden cleanup a little bit, after that first killing frost, or even before, just removing all the foliage away from the plant, and because the spores for next year can survive in that plant debris at the base of the plant. So powdery mildew is very specific, as we've talked about before. So it's probably not coming in on other plants. It's probably there on your plant. So if you can break that cycle a little bit, that may help.
Yep, excellent. And really quickly, what causes bacterial wilt in cosmos? I do know that bacterial wilt could be seed-borne. So especially if this is a one-off that you've only seen, you seeded your annual cosmos from a different seed supplier or something like that, that could have been a contributing issue. Again, Rhoda, other thoughts on that as our plant disease expert?
You've got it about as much as I actually hadn't heard of a bacteria wilt on cosmos before. So the other general thing with bacterial diseases is generally they take a lot of moisture to really get going. So I don't know if you're overwatering your cosmos, or if it's in a spot where it accumulates water a little bit more or something like that. But again, always get a good seed source and be certain that you're not collecting seed from this plant or allowing it to go to seed, because that might be spreading the disease with the seed.
Mhm. Yeah, and the other thing with Cosmos, just an observation based on our trial gardens in McCrory, is if you're not deadheading them and they finally have set enough seed, you are going to see complete dieback of that plant because it's completed what it was meant to do. So just something else to remember: if your whole Cosmos has died, if it did set seed, that might just be that it's completed its life cycle as well. But for any disease concerns, you can also always reach out to us and we'll work with the plants diagnostic clinic here on campus. But with that, I think my time is more than used up, so I'm going to pass the mic.
All right. And up next is Christina and McCrory Gardens. And I will stop share because Christina is going to share her screen.
All right. Let's see here. Okay, well, hello, everybody. I am, let's see. There we go. Oops, I have to allow it to share. So here we go. But the gardens do look absolutely beautiful right now, just so you all can see. So I'm excited to show you guys some of the pictures that I got today of the gardens. But let me see.
Is it allowing you to share your screen?
No, it's not. I've done this before. I wonder why it's not. It says.
Make sure that you're a host.
I think it's my computer. No. I have so many cool pictures like every week. Let's see. Here we see. I think I can do it like this. Okay.
Okay.
Aha. We will not. But it says that I might need to quit and reopen to do that.
Tell you what, let's go to Amanda.
Okay.
And have her do her segment, and you can keep working on that.
Okay. I apologize. I will be right back.
We look forward to it.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
So, Amanda, take it away.
As I unmute myself, so everyone's getting Zoom bingo tonight. All right. So I'm going to start out with the critter that ended up in my inbox today and from over the weekend. We have reports coming in of bumble flower beetles. So these are a large-ish beetle. A lot of people think that they are June bugs. They're sort of similar in size, but you can see they have more of a pattern on their exoskeleton. So they have more of a mottling, whereas, June bugs are just sort of uniformly brown in color. And these bumble flower beetles will feed on already damaged fruit and produce. So if you've got tomatoes in your garden that have maybe split from some of the recent rain events, I know we got an inch here in Pierre last week, and that caused some of my tomatoes to kind of burst. That's the kind of thing that the bumble flower beetles will go after. And so there's not really anything that you can do about them. This is the time of year where you don't want to be putting insecticides onto your garden produce because that's going to impact when you can harvest it. So, you'd end up spraying something and sure, it might kill some insects, but then you're also going to have to say, wait 6 days before you can harvest. And, then your fruit might not be great. So really sanitation is the big thing to keep ahead of these beetles. So if you do notice damaged produce, split tomatoes or whatever, remove those from the plants. You can, bury them in your compost pile or otherwise sort of remove them from the area because they can be sort of a continued source of the flower beetles and then also some of the picnic beetles and the sap beetles that will do the same kind of thing. So if you notice that you've got fruit that is getting fed on by, these beetles or some other smaller beetles. They're not doing the initial damage, they're just sort of exploiting wounds that already exist. So next slide, please. This is also the time of year where I get a lot of questions about wasp activities. I also get a lot of questions from folks who want somebody to come and remove the bees from their yard. And usually the first question I ask on that is send me a picture, because we're going to make sure that we identify it properly. Obviously, there are some honeybee keepers that are more than happy to come adopt a wild honeybee colony. However, probably about 95% of the time, the people who think they've got a honeybee hive actually have a wasp nest. So this is the time of year when wasps are, the social ones at least, their nests are at their most robust, sort of largest numbers of workers. And especially with the cool temperatures, they might not be moving quite as fast, and they kind of, get noticed. And so this is when people want to know, well, what can I do about them? And my advice is really to wait until the frost. Because at this point, like I said, those nests are at their maximum size and sort of strength. So any kind of control measure that you go at them with, you are going to be met with a strong defense. This is not the time to be getting up on a ladder and spraying a can of Raid at something. You can really just let nature, take its course. If you've managed to ignore them for this long in the season, you can let them go for another couple of weeks. You're probably going to get yourself into more trouble trying to remove them than you are by just waiting them out. And then if you notice there are places where you've got wasp activity, keep an eye on those voids or, other sort of nooks and crannies. And those are the places that you want to start scouting next spring, when the wasps that have overwintered, the queens, will start building their new colonies. So check out those nooks and crannies, and these nests are much easier to manage when they are small, when you knock them down when they just start and it's maybe only 1 or 2 wasps instead of like 50. And the picture on the right there, those are some European paper wasps that are hanging out in one of my basement windows. And I just let them do their thing because I'm an entomologist and that's just what I do. But I do have a couple areas where they are quite happy, and I just kind of avoid them and let them chill out. And then the picture on the left is actually a solitary wasp. So there's lots of really cool, really beautiful wasps out there that you may notice visiting your flowers. And, again, most of those are not, aggressive towards people at all. The ones that get all wasps in trouble are the yellow jackets, which are social ground nesters. And those are the ones that when folks mow over them or maybe do some weed whacking over their nests and they don't know it's there, that they can get themselves into some trouble. So it's important to kind of keep an eye out earlier in the season, because that's when it's much easier to manage them. But at this point, just let them freeze. Next slide, please. And then we're also coming into accidental invader territory. These are insects and other arthropods that are moving inside because they also would like a place to spend the winter. On the right, we have the multicolored Asian lady beetle. I got a lot of questions about this one at State Fair because for some reason people don't think that it's a ladybug. It's totally a ladybug. It's just an introduced species. It's not one of our native lady beetles. You can distinguish the multicolored Asian lady beetle from other lady beetle species by the black M on its pronotum. Despite, regardless of what's going on the rest of the elytra, which can be very variable in sort of color and number of spots, that M on the thorax is going to always be there. So that's what you can kind of look for to easily distinguish it from our native lady beetle species. But these insects, they also eat aphids. They're predators out in the garden, but where they get themselves into trouble is that they will congregate and spend the winter in large numbers together inside a structure. And so they can end up in attics or garages, and that can be kind of annoying to people. A lot of these insects that are moving in the fall, they're just looking for a place for shelter. They're not looking to feed or reproduce indoors. So really the best defense is having a good offense, doing the home repairs, checking screens, weather stripping, that kind of stuff, to reduce the number of places for them to come inside. Once they come inside, they chill out. you know, on the random warm winter days, that's when they'll start sort of moving around again, and we kind of notice them because they can't escape. So trying to stop them from getting in is going to be the most solid strategy. On the left there is a box elder bug. Honestly, here in Pierre, we usually have a ton of box elder bugs. I have not seen a lot lately, so we'll see if they start showing up, but they're one of our true bugs that does the same kind of thing. They kind of congregate and will look to move into structures. I know we always have some here in our office in Pierre that are flying around in the winter when they kind of warm up. So these critters that are coming inside, you know, perimeter sprays can be helpful. However, they're only going to kill things that walk across them. So you're still going to end up with dead insects inside. So that is one option. But again, the other one is just kind of having that good offense and making sure that you've got things sealed up and, you know, do some of those quick weekend projects to make it harder for insects to get indoors. Next slide. And then I usually have a cool insect alert, but this week I had to branch out and do some cool arthropods because it is spider season. I absolutely love some of the large spiders that show up in our gardens and around our homes. And I know I consider it sort of like nature's Halloween decoration. I know other people might not be so inclined, but spiders are great, especially these ones that make the large webs. They can really catch, you know, a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of other flying insects. On the left, we have a banded garden spider, and this one you can actually see her underside. On the other side, she has sort of these almost iridescent or like pearly horizontal bands. So a lot of people run into the yellow garden spider, one of our argiopes, but this is another one that's fairly common in South Dakota. People will run into them sort of in their tomato plants. They'll have made like a big web and you're picking tomatoes and all of a sudden you're face to face with this spider. But really, you know, they're just a great garden friend and they're not, you know, harmful to people at all. And then on the right, we have one of the cat-faced spiders. And I've got another one of these on my front porch this year, but I do notice in Pierre that this is a very common kind of spider. They're also fairly large and they make sort of that stereotypical, you know, spider web. And it's just really cool to see, you know, great architects, and they just do a lot of cool stuff when they're out there hunting. I know that walking face first into a spider web isn't always the most pleasant experience, which is why I tend to like, you know, lead with a stick or a broom handle if I'm in a place that I haven't been for a while, in my yard or in my basement. But yeah, I think spiders are really awesome, and I try to get people to appreciate them out in their garden and out in nature. For either one of these, if they happen to be indoors, they don't want to be inside. So they're definitely some of the catch and release spiders that you just want to put them back outside and they'll be perfectly happy. So yeah, so that's my little spider season plug. And I think that is the end of my slide. So if folks have any insect or arthropod questions, make sure to throw them in the chat. And this can be sort of the nice segue into Christina with McCrory Gardens, because I will be out there on Saturday for Insect Fest. That's going to be on September 11th from 10 to 2. So I'll be at the Straw Bale House with my insect collection and hanging out with the Assemble an Arthropod entries. So I encourage everyone to come out. It's a free day at the garden. So, you know, share that with your friends, grab your kids or grandkids. We've got a photo contest that I believe you can still submit entries until through tomorrow. So if you're on Facebook, check out the McCrory Gardens Facebook page and submit some entries to the photo contest, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you on Saturday. And with that, I will turn it over to Christina, but I'll keep an eye on the Q&A if anybody has questions.
All right.
All right, let's do that now. Let's start my share again. There we go.
All right.
So now we got it. Pull it up. And all right, very good. I just had a permission off on my for the screen recording. So anyway, welcome. I mean, hello again, everybody. Amanda did a great job talking about the Insect Festival that's coming up. So thank you for talking about that already. It is just such a fun day. I really, really love the Insect Festival. It's become a really fun event at the gardens. And it's going to be this Saturday already. And so I'm really excited to be there and to see all the different things. we're with Amanda, you know, out here. We also really love insects. So I have several insect pets, and I know a lot of people that do as well, which maybe sounds different to some, but they're pretty neat things, and it's fun to share them and to find other people that are really excited about them too. But there's not only the creepy crawlies, we'll have cockroaches and things like that, but also, you know, we'll be talking about some of those beautiful insects out there, like the monarch butterflies, that are more universally loved. And so we'll be talking about tagging and things like that as well. So like she said, if you have some great photos, send them over to McCrory Gardens. They're still being posted through tomorrow. So that's a fun thing. Or the assemble an arthropod, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. If you could hop over there. If you could go to that, oh no, my gosh, I'm doing it myself today. So sorry. So the next slide here is the assemble an arthropod activity. You can get it from McCrory Gardens too, but it's just like the basics of, you know, you put your name and some contact information, your age, so we can kind of separate into categories because adults can do them too. And you choose an arthropod. We kind of opened it up to all arthropods, not just insects, so that you could do things like spiders and things like that too. And you can put the common name and then the order name, habitat, and just two kind of cool things about your arthropod. And then you build an arthropod out of any materials you can find. So there's some really neat ones already on display at the gardens. You know, using like bottles and tissue paper and pipe cleaners, or one year girl used marbles and pipe cleaners or paper and things like that. So I love seeing the creativity that people come up with that. So that's something that you can look forward to or try or enter as well. We love seeing them. So please do. And then another just upcoming activity is the party on the porch. So another time to come see the gardens, come interact with people at the gardens and see all the wonderful flowers is, and the first one is that September 12th, and then it's also on the 19th and the 26th. And there will be live music, food truck, and things like that to come enjoy in the gardens. So what's in bloom? I don't know if you technically, I don't always show stuff that's necessarily in bloom. Sometimes it's also in fruit or just looks really awesome right now. But what's a highlight at the gardens right now? And one thing that I just haven't spoken about much is some things in the vegetable garden. And I really, really enjoy this red malabar spinach. I don't know if anyone here has grown it, but it's this climbing vine with these gorgeous like red stalks on it, and it gets little flowers and then kind of these fruits on it. But the highlight of it is, if you like edibles, is the leaves, and I think the stems as well, but the leaves are really good spinach substitute, and they do really well in hot climates. It's a tropical plant. And so it does really well with our heat. And I guess it's high in vitamins like vitamin C and maybe A, but it's definitely high, you know, a good nutrient content, something that you can use in the summer when sometimes your spinach, it doesn't like the heat so much. And it's beautiful. It just covers these vines or these trellises that we have in the vegetable garden. It climbs all the way to the top from seed early on in the year. So that's one that I very much enjoy. Another vine, I thought that I didn't hit on a couple vines, just with some kind of neat fruit on it right now, is the American bittersweet. So the Celastra scandens, that also has these, it's just kind of a lovely vine that's growing on our vine arbor actually right now. Not an edible fruit, but nonetheless a lovely plant. Popcorn Senna. I just think this is so cool looking. It was an annual that we grew. You can see kind of the size of it and the flowers. That's actually in our vegetable garden, but there's some in the containers around the garden. It's not very common. That's what else I think is kind of fun, is you don't kind of see it everywhere. So we had to plant it from seed, but it grew very easily from seed. It not only has kind of this striking, cool flower, but its name does it justice. It's, if you kind of stroke the leaves and smell, it smells just like popcorn. It's almost odd. It's really weird. But a cool kind of highlight, plant that you can have something to talk about that you have in your garden, and something to enjoy if you come visit McCrory. So like I said, this one's in the vegetable garden. There's also in the containers around the building, you can find it as well. Another kind of neat annual that can reseed itself is this spider flower, Cleo Floriana. This is just the queen mix, so it kind of has some variable colors, but it's just such a unique, cool looking flower. And you can see those sort of spider legs under the flower that give it a really unique look to it. And that is probably about 3 feet tall. So it does, I don't have really an image that shows its height, but it does get pretty tall. So it works as a really nice like center of a container if you have a big container, or kind of backdrop annual flower that also grows really quite easily from seed. Zinnias. I love zinnias, and they're so easy to grow, and they're so, we plant those direct sow. You can right in the garden, we direct sow them into our cells so that we can, our little 6-packs, but or at McCrory, but there's just so many colors, and the pollinators, love them, and they have such a long bloom season. So this one is Zowie Yellow Flame, and I could just sit there and stare at that flower for the longest time. So this one is over by the hummingbird trellis, kind of close to the herb garden, but there's different zinnia kind of scattered throughout the garden that are beautiful. But that one really struck me today when I was visiting, and I wanted to share that one with you guys. So that's kind of the flowers that I wanted to highlight today for you guys. Like, it's, as I kind of say every week, is that there's always so much out there that I don't even get to share, that you guys have to come and visit and just take it all in. So I see it. Is there a chat here? Let's see. If Senna is edible, I don't believe that it is edible. But it's just the scent that's like popcorn, but I don't actually know that for sure. That'd be something that I'd have to look up to make sure whether it is, but I don't believe that it is an edible plant. It's just kind of a scent and fun for that reason. But
It has a really nice texture to the foliage, a little different
it
texture.
does kind of that, finer texture. It's a really neat plant. One of our crew leader, actually, Miranda, had seen it at a botanic garden. She worked in Minnesota, so she kind of brought that, I guess, the idea and the excitement for it with her. So yeah, it's a neat plant. So anything else? Any other questions for me?
I'm not seeing any, but
All right.
I guess
if you have
ask
them, be sure to put in the QA.
Sure.
Excuse me.
I guess I have a clarifying question about Insect Fest. I think you mentioned at the beginning of your slides, people could submit pictures or something for that. Where might they submit that to?
So those are to be emailed to, I believe it's Kelly. So it's on our Facebook page. So if you have our Facebook page, I can look quick to see if I can get the email, but I know for sure if you look on our Facebook page, they have the photo that shows there's a particular email, or you could send them to SDSU.McCrory Gardens, and that's just one word, at sdstate.edu, and they would get them that way as well. But I think on the flyer on our Facebook page, there's another direct email to Kelly who's posting them. And I can't remember the spelling of her last name. But so the SDSU at .McCrory Gardens at sdstate.edu would also reach us, but to and there's a Facebook page. Thank you for sharing that. So. All right, anything else? Thank you for that question. That's a great question.
Hey, Christina, I'll need you to stop sharing so
All
that I
right.
can.
Sounds good. Thank you. Oops, I'm gonna get out of here and back to Zoom. All right. All right. Well, thanks again. See you guys.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to being able to go there next week.
Yay. Yay.
I'm gonna try to get over a little early, so. There we are. Going to talk a little bit about some diseases in relation to garden cleanup. So I don't see a whole lot of Septoria West River. I used to see it really a lot over here when we lived in Brookings, but Septoria is the one that has the little tiny spots with lighter centers, and sometimes they'll coalesce, so you end up with a larger brown area on the leaf, but it tends to have those smaller spots, and the leaf will turn yellow after a while. It starts from the bottom of the plant and works its way up. And if you have that, just remember that you need to clean up the plant debris at the end of this season. Don't save any seed from those tomatoes, because the disease can last within the fruit, so it can be spread by the seed itself. So if you're saving seed, be careful not to save any seed from diseased plants, whether it's Septoria, or I've got a picture here of early blight, which is another disease that we see quite often in South Dakota. And with that, we see the target pattern on the leaves. Septoria doesn't affect the fruit at all, but early blight almost looks a little bit like blossom end rot on the side of the tomato instead of on the end, but a dark, fairly firm rot on the early blight, paired with this target pattern on the leaves, tells you you have early blight. Both of these will survive on plant debris, seed, and equipment. So even you might be needing to clean off your tomato cages from year to year, or if you're using particularly wood stakes or something like that, make sure that you clean those off. Another disease that can overwinter, so we need to start thinking about how to decrease the inoculum for next year's apple scab. Again, this is very common on the east side of the state, not so much on the western side. But here's a couple of photos that you can see they can look a little bit differently, but they start out as almost an olive green spot on the, usually see it on the top of the leaf. You may turn it over and see it a little more clearly. But anyway, it affects not only the leaves, of course, but the apples itself. And we can end up with apples that look like this. They're edible if you peel them, as long as they haven't started to rot too much. But generally, we prefer not to have this kind of disease on our fruit. So where does it overwinter? It will overwinter on these rotted fruit. It will overwinter on the leaves that fall to the ground. The spores, for the most part, will travel less than about 100 feet. So if your tree is isolated from neighbors by that much, you're good to go. If your neighbors are closer than that and also have scab, you might want to talk with them about how you can work together to reduce the inoculum. But of course, one of the first things to do is pick up any of the old apples that might fall to the ground that are infected, and the leaves. So if it's feasible, raking up the leaves and removing them is one option. If that seems a little daunting, another way is to run a mulching mower over them and shred them up well. That helps expose more of the leaves to the bacteria that will break down and overcome the fungal inoculum in the leaves. Another way to help that progress a little more quickly is to spray the fallen leaves with a solution of fertilizer of urea, which is very strong, as you can see, 4600, very strong nitrogen. And it's giving a nitrogen source again to those bacteria that help break down the dead leaves. And as they break them down, they're going to destroy the little structures that produce the inoculum for next year. The other way to deal with apple scab or some of our other apple diseases is when we buy our plants, looking for disease resistance. So if you're in eastern South Dakota or in Brookings, where the crab apples are notorious for getting scab, I would start with Freedom and Liberty. Those are two apples that are fairly good quality, good keeping quality for the most part. But look at the scab resistance. More pluses means more resistance. So those are the two that I would start with. And then I'd start to look at some of the other apples that I'm interested in and seeing how they compare. Snow Sweet has some resistance. Honeycrisp has some resistance. Harrelson has some resistance. Do I have fire blight in my area? Then I would also consider some of these other varieties in relation to fire blight, so, or cedar apple rust. So take a look at those if you're looking for something that will require less attention to avoid the apple scab. And then finally, I talked a little bit last week about when to harvest squash and melons, and I also wanted to just show you a picture of the ground spot. And we see there the slip on the muskmelon. Remember to store these at room temperature. They are actually warm season vegetables and will store better at room temperature until you cut them. And then we need to put them in the refrigerator just for food safety reasons. I want to talk a little bit about harvesting potatoes and how to keep potatoes, harvesting and curing them so that they will keep longer into the winter. So the trick is to get the potato to strengthen up the skin on them by allowing, one, you can allow the vines to die back if they're already starting to die. That's great. That's what you want to have happen. Frost will take it out. Sometimes we get a frost and then it gets too cold too soon to get a good cure on the tubers. So that kind of just depends on the year. Another thing you can do is just cut off the vines. Or, you know, if you've had a really frustrating year, we're tired of COVID, we just want to beat on something, you can just take a bat or a rake or whatever you want and just beat on those vines for a while and stress them out. And that will cause them, as they start to die, to set those potato skins. Once the vine is starting to die or has died, you want to wait about a week or two after the tops die back before you dig, because the potato is going to be in the process of strengthening those skins during those 2 weeks. You don't want to do anything that's going to start the potato growing again. So unless you have rainfall, you can't help that, but don't irrigate after the tops are starting to die. And if you're wondering, are they ready yet? You can take the two tubers and sort of rub them against each other or rub them with your thumb. And if the skins don't come off, that means the skin is set. And remember, these are easily bruised, so you don't want to drop them more than 4 to 6 inches. And remember, we always need to keep our potatoes in a dark area so that they don't develop toxins. Now, once you dig them, once the the skins are set and you've dug them, you can cure the potatoes by storing them in a dark and humid but ventilated room temperature for about 2 weeks. So warmer temperatures, from 70 to 80 degrees. But high humidity, if you can, you could even add a humidifier if you needed to, but you don't want to have free moisture on the skins either. Do this for up to 2 weeks, and that will help them further set those skins. And once you've done that, then tubers will keep best stored at 40 to 50 degrees, again in relatively high humidity, but not free water. So if you get a root cellar, that's wonderful. If you don't, you might want to spread them in a thin layer on your basement cement floor. Is generally a little cooler and will help keep them a little longer. And again, as we talked about last year, don't store potatoes near apples, as the apples, that ripening compound given off by the apples can cause the potatoes to sprout. And one last advertisement of an event this weekend. You've got your choice of a wide variety depending on where in the state you are. There's a free harvest festival with the Youth and Family Services farm over in Box Elder, South Dakota, from 10 to 2 with music and games and food, and everyone is welcome. If you need more information, you can call this phone number or email Darcy, or just show up if you know where the Fullerton farm is. It's pretty much in the middle of Box Elder. And if you did not have a chance to get your questions answered tonight, and I see there's one on horseradish, we'll pick that up next week. If you have not had a chance to get your question answered, you're welcome to contact the garden hotline. You see the phone numbers and the emails there that you can contact them. You can send them pictures. If they don't know the answer to the questions, it will go on up the ladder to some of us, and sometimes we consult with each other and try to figure out an answer, and every once in a while we send it to somebody else to figure it out too. So we do our best to get your questions answered. With that, I would like to stop share. There we are. With that, I'd like to extend thank you to our panelists tonight, Kristine and Christina and Amanda. Thank you all for joining us tonight, panelists and attendees. We look forward to seeing you next week and wish you a good week. Have a good week, everyone.